Today's episode of the GoldCast is sponsored by Banana Splits. Raymond, as you know, I was in San Francisco this past weekend with you.
It was fantastic.
Thank you. With our entire family, we were there. And after I was done hanging out with you guys, Jessica and I, we went to Ben & Jerry's in the Wharf, and we got ourselves some delicious Banana Splits ice cream. It was delicious.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was good.
Yeah, that was very good. And so this episode is sponsored by Banana Splits because they made me feel good this weekend and they make me feel good right now. Now, Raymond, before we get started with this episode, why don't you let them know where can they find us?
You can like us on Facebook.com/TheGoldCast, and you can also follow us on Twitter @_Goldcast, and you can also subscribe to us via iTunes, YouTube, and Stitcher, all under the same moniker of The GoldCast. Like, subscribe, and comment because we love to interact with you.
Yes. And Raymond, where can they find you?
I am on Twitter @RaySolis, and I am on Instagram @RaySolis1.
And you can find me on Instagram @RudySolis3 and on Twitter @RudySolis3RD. So concludes another edition of the GoldCast. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So this episode, as we promised, we said at every 4 weeks, we would do a fantasy check-in. Now, that coward of a host, Louis Bartoni, he couldn't dare show his face on this episode after the Rams lost to the Bucks, and now the 49ers are in first place. That coward, conveniently, is at work today. And I'm going to make sure he hears this. I'm going to make sure he hears that I said this. That's right. I called him a coward. I called those Rams cowards because now the 49ers are first place in the NFC West, and those lowly douchebag Rams, they are in second, and it's a glorious day, Raymond. And so he couldn't show up for this NFC West fantasy value check-in that he said he would because, like the Rams, he just can't hack it. So me and Raymond, we're going to do the NFC West Fantasy Value Check-In. We did one right before the season on August 15th. Go back through your episodes if you haven't heard it. Listen to it. And we're going to check in how right were Louie and I. How wrong were Louie and I. We're going to talk about it. But first, the greatest fanalist in the game is here. Your professor of fanalism is here. Class is in session. Let's go.
San Francisco, are you ready?
This is the GoldCast.
Boom! Welcome to another edition of the GoldCast. We are the voice of the Bay. I'm your host, Rudy Solis III, and with me is my brother, my co-host,
Raymond Solis the First, baby.
Boom! All right, Raymond. I mean, aside from the obvious, aside from the fact that, can we just for just 2 seconds, right? Just 2 seconds, can we just bask in the glory of being first in the NFC West? Can we just bask in that glory? Can we bask in the glory that we dismantled the Bucks and the Rams? The Rams couldn't even get past them.
Of course
we
we
just
can.
bask in
That's
that
what happens
glory
when you dominate the bye week.
Thank you. Raymond, we have said this every year on the GoldCast for many years. We are undefeated on the bye.
Still undefeated.
We are the Miami Dolphins of the bye week. We are the 14-0 Miami Dolphins of the bye week. That's what we are. We are undefeated. Raymond, just Raymond, I kind of decided after our last podcast that it was time to just stop worrying and love the 3-0 start to the season. And that's what I've done. I have just been basking in the glory of 3-0, something we haven't done in many, many years. We have broken a lot of long-standing 49er records to season starts with this 3-0, and it feels nice. And then after this weekend, after the Rams went down to the Bucks, we now find ourselves in first place. Raymond, the floor is yours. How do you feel?
I think it feels great to know that the Rams have got some vulnerabilities there, particularly, Gurley just does not seem like himself this season. And when he's not himself and you force Jared Goff to beat you with his arm, you don't get the same results as you do when that team is running on all cylinders, led by Gurley. Gurley is the catalyst of that offense, and dating back to late last year into the playoffs when he wasn't 100%, all the way to this year for some reason doesn't seem 100%. And Goff cannot beat you with his arm. Unless you give him a crap ton of time, then, him, like any other quarterback, is going to be able to shred you up. But, I don't think Goff doesn't impress me when handling the blitz. I'm sure Louis disagrees with me. But losing to the Buccaneers, who, have a, 50-50 defense and a pretty good offense, especially in the passing game, with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. We're going to, we'll mention a little bit later. But that was a big one. And Seattle. What can I say about Seattle? Seattle just kind of, Seattle's more easier to dissect because it's just like they're aging. They're aging and, it's not easy to refill, Pro Bowl positions like the ones that they had. Some of those are going to end up in Canton. So then that's hard to fill up.
The Legion of Boom is a historically good defense, arguably in the, I'm not going to say on par, but in the same room as a 1985 Bears.
It'll get mentioned.
Denver Broncos.
Yeah, it'll get mentioned with the Broncos and the Ravens and the Bears. It'll be among those, generational teams that comes along and just kind of dominates the league and doesn't even necessarily need the other half of the football to win all their games, because that's just how and the rules were obviously different when they were going to those Super Bowls. But I digress on that. But I mean, here's the thing: they're aging. That's the kind of the gist of their story. It's a little bit different than the Rams because the Rams are still relatively young. Their coach is still young, and he's an innovative mind. He's a good mind to have in the league. He's not easy to play against, but at the same time, they've got some deficiencies there. When the running game isn't established, it's really, really hard for them to keep going. Or I would say keep going, but it's hard for them to lean on Goff for the win. Goff's not the type of quarterback that carries your team. He's the type of quarterback that thrives with a good supporting cast around him. And if you start to chip away at that cast, he's pretty vulnerable. But then on the other side of the ball, we know that Russell Wilson can carry his team. He is that type of quarterback. He will most likely go to the Hall of Fame. But the problem is his supporting cast is so bad, particularly on the defensive side. They've got holes. Even Clowney. Clowney's been okay. He hasn't been he hasn't been the runaway dominant person that he was in Houston. And I think part of that is because in Houston you have to think about J.J. Watt too. So that opened up opportunities for him. And over here he doesn't necessarily have that same exposure. So I think
he can't carry the defense the way they thought he was going to. And I'll be honest, I was terrified when they traded for him.
Yeah, I thought it was a huge pickup, but it really hasn't worked out for them so far. So that means that clearly he's the type of defensive player that needs complementary pieces in order for him to get going. He's not a J.J. Watt. J.J. Watt can operate on his own. It doesn't matter. So, they're vulnerable through age and, some acquisitions not working out. Despite coming in with the resumes that they had. So, and as a result, now the Niners are in first place. So now we have a golden opportunity on Monday, which we will talk about in a completely different episode.
That's right.
We will give you a small preview in saying that Monday's game is now pivotal based on our breakdown of the NFC West just now. And the reason we don't mention Cardinals is because they don't matter.
No, they don't. Just like the Diamondbacks, don't matter. The Cardinals don't matter. the Rams are lucky to even be here. Everyone knows the true rivalries between the 49ers and the Seahawks. But hey, guess what, Rams? You're at the big boy table. Suck it up while you're here, because you know what? When dessert is done, you are out of here. Okay? So just a little reminder that there's really only two teams at the big boy table in the NFC West. But we're happy that you're here. You can sit with the adults for a little bit, but as soon as it's over, get the F out. So
yeah. They're not allowed at the big boy table right now.
They're really not. I don't care. Sean. This is gonna be the true test of Sean McVay. Sean, I've said this incessantly, offline, online, and I will say it again here. The Rams, the 2019 Rams, are literally almost the spitting image, metaphorically speaking, of the 2013 49ers. In 2011. Jim Harbaugh inherits a team that has all the talent in the world, that should be in first place, that just cannot get over the hump because of the inefficiencies of the coaching staff. That is the team Jim Harbaugh inherited in 2011, and he proved it by taking them to the NFC Championship. Very similar situation with the Rams. Excellent GM, excellent front office when it comes to picking players, but Jeff Fisher and his crew could not get past 8-8. Sean McVay inherits an a well-crafted team talent-wise and takes them to the playoffs, first in the NFC West. Then he takes them to the Super Bowl the following year, 13-3, just like the 49ers. And just like the 49ers, they both lose the Super Bowl, and now they're here the year after, and you're starting to see a little bit of some chips in the armor, and you're starting to see that maybe their quarterback in this system isn't as efficient as they thought they would. The only difference is that they're still trying to kind of cater to Jared Goff. They were not doing that with Colin Kaepernick and the 49ers. They forced him into a system that I think he was completely not ready for, and I thought they should have allowed him to continue passing out of the pocket, continue running. I think had they done that for the entire year, he would have continued his dominance. That's a discussion for a GoldCast from 4 years ago. This is 2019. That discussion's over. And I think you're seeing a team that, to me, you are looking at almost a spitting image of the 2013 49ers. This is a team that was going to continue its dominance. They're going to be pretty good, but they're not going to get back to the Super Bowl. I would be surprised if they even get back to the NFC Championship. I would be very surprised. The 49ers went to 3 NFC Championships in a row. The Rams have not even matched that success. They've only matched the failure of losing a Super Bowl like the Niners did. I would not be surprised if they did not get back to the NFC Championship. I know it's a long season, but I wouldn't be surprised. And having said that, I'm really curious to see how Sean McVay and Jared Goff do next year when the chinks and the armor crumble even further. I wouldn't be surprised if this team does even worse next year. But Raymond, what are your thoughts on all that I just said?
I think it's absolutely true. As where they go from here, we'll have to discuss some more, perhaps with Louis, so he can give us a little bit more of a deeper insight into what he sees from the team, and then we'll of course disagree with everything he says. And but as far as you're saying, I think we are seeing. You're seeing a couple things. You're seeing the fact that Jared Goff, can't carry the team on his own. That doesn't mean he isn't capable of performing well. I mean, they had a pretty big shootout there with Tampa Bay. The defenses gave up in this game. So, there was no problem with the offense, but, one team had more offense than the other, enough to keep going. So I think that, going forward, they're going to have to step it up on defense because the road doesn't get any easier for them this week and next week. And especially the following week, especially week 6. So that will be a big deal. Seattle doesn't necessarily. Seattle's got is a bit more scrappy.
They got moxie. They got some moxie to them.
I don't know if you feel that way. I feel like they got a little bit more scrappiness to them, and part of that is because they have a quarterback that is capable of carrying the load. And he wasn't doing anything 2 weeks ago, and in fantasy ended up with 56 points. He ended up exploding in the fourth quarter in a not so great. I can't remember whether they won or lost that game. But it ended up, it was 2 weeks ago. I'm pretty sure did they lose this past week or the week before?
I'm looking it up right now. I'll tell you right now. Give me 2 shakes.
2 shakes of a lamb's tail.
That's right. So beat the Bengals 21-20. Beat the Steelers 28-26.
It was the Saints. They lost to the Saints. So 2 weeks ago. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So they were losing that game, and then they put up 20 points in the fourth quarter.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when the chips are down, you're against the rope. Russell Wilson is capable of, giving a really good fight.
And if you look, the offense is still pretty good. 21 points in the first week, 28 points in the second week, 27 points in the third week, 27 points in the fourth week. 3 weeks in a row, almost the exact same amount of points. 28 points, 27, 27.
Yeah,
very consistent.
They're averaging nearly 4 touchdowns a game, which is great. A great average, any team would want, especially if you're Miami. But with them, I think it's like what their deficiencies are. It's on the defensive side, and it's with age. You just have to. Russell Wilson is just so elusive, and that's what makes him so dangerous. Is because he's so good at avoiding the sack that he can keep the plays going. So, and the guys that, his supporting cast is well aware of this because he's just been doing it for so long that they're able to, they feed off of that vibe, whether it's, and I know the rookie DK Metcalf is having a good season so far. Tyler Lockett is still reliable. Gary Jennings is out there. Jerron Brown is out there. So, they got playmakers there, and they also got a good running back core. Despite some of the mishaps from Carson, when he's not fumbling the ball, he's doing very well. So, and Rashad Penny's a reliable backup, a solid backup. So they've got some players out there that can carry this team if the defense is not able to hold, which, they weren't against New Orleans. But they lost that lead early, and they had to play catch-up, and that was just too much. But they did bounce back against Arizona. But then again, it's Arizona. You might as well be playing Miami. It really doesn't matter when you're playing either of those teams. So I think, they still got some punch. I'm less worried about them though, because I feel like Pete Carroll can be beat. Pete Carroll, and the same with McVay, because I believe with McVay, McVay is a derivative of Kyle Shanahan. He comes from he's like a subtree in the Kyle Shanahan offensive coordinator days. He comes from that group. So, and to me, don't get me wrong, Sean McVay is a great play designer, but I just feel like Kyle Shanahan is still on another level when you put these two together. And part of it is because he's been doing it for much, much longer, and he comes from, NFL royalty in his father, Mike Shanahan, who comes from NFL royalty in that he was a coordinator under Bill Walsh and won Super Bowls with the Niners in the 80s, and was able to take that knowledge and, take John Elway over the hump a couple times. So, there's just a little bit more, there's just a deeper resume that leads me to believe that Kyle Shanahan's just a I think he's better than Sean McVay, even though 100%. the records of the teams in the last couple of years wouldn't reflect that. You could debate that, but at the same time, I just think you got to look at his body of work and what he's done with quarterbacks and offenses around the league over the course of his tenure as an offensive coordinator, and it just it's just far and away greater than anything McVay has done. Although McVay going to the Super Bowl in his second year as a rookie coach in his mid-30s is still an amazing accomplishment. Only a few guys have done that. John Gruden did that when he was in his 30s with the Raiders in Tampa Bay, taking them or he didn't go with the Raiders, but he was on his way with the Raiders before getting cut loose and going to Tampa and taking a stellar group to the promised land. But anyways, I'm going off on a rant. But either way, the point is these teams are beatable. And now that we have a healthy team that's starting to gel together, particularly on the defensive side, and the offensive side has moments of gelling, but still needs to iron out some kinks in terms of discipline with the penalties and that kind of stuff. The fumbles, the turnovers, and the penalties are really the two things that need to get ironed out on offense, and then they'll be fine. So once that gets happened, though, I just think, to me, the biggest X factor that we have on our team right now, before we get into our topic for the night, is just Kyle Shanahan. To me, whenever I look at the matchups, I say, like, all right, so there's some matchups here on defensively that, I like the matchup here with, D Ford against this so-and-so, and I like Richard Sherman in this matchup against this receiver. But at the same time, when I really kind of look at the forest versus the individual trees, I always come back to the same X factor, which is Kyle Shanahan, because I think he's better than Pete Carroll. I think he's better, and Pete Carroll's good, but remember, Pete Carroll comes from an older era of football where, I think, and he runs an old school system. He's the head coach. He has an offensive coordinator. He has a defensive coordinator. Kyle Shanahan's like, nope, I'm the offensive coordinator and the head coach, because nobody can call plays the way I can call plays, and we've seen that demonstrated multiple times in the last couple of years. Even during the losing years, we've seen him being able to design plays around players' strengths and able to get the most out of them, even when you're 1-10, and still competing. So that to me is I think goes a long way. Despite not getting the outcome you want at the very end, I still think there's a reason. In other words, there's a reason why majority of coaches and pundits say that Kyle Shanahan is the best play caller in the NFL. It's because nobody designs plays as good as he does, because nobody understands both sides of the game. He understands defense just as well as he understands offense. If you've ever heard him talk in the multitude of interviews that he gives, whenever he decides to get into the X and O's a little bit, and he doesn't get too deep because his audience doesn't understand it as well as he does, and rightfully so. We don't understand it as well as Kyle does, but whenever he does, he speaks so competently about the defense just as much as it does the offense, because that's where the play design ingenuity comes from. It comes from being able to know how to expose a defense regardless of what kind of look you're getting and who's on the other side waiting for you. So that takes some pretty deep knowledge to be able to accomplish that. And I think that as long as the team stays healthy, there's going to be some promising and very exciting matchups in the division as we go forward in the season.
100%. 100%. And we will be discussing that at length on Sunday's episode of the GoldCast. We will be discussing that at length. So, Raymond, let's get into this. Let's get into what we came for. We promised the people, we said that this would be a fantasy-centric episode. So, last time on August 15th, when Louie and I did our previous episode, we said the top 3 players that would have the most fantasy value out of the NFC West were, in no particular order, but we went with the 49ers first because this is the 49ers GoldCast: George Kittle, Todd Gurley, and David Johnson. Obviously, Todd Gurley from the Los Angeles Rams, David Johnson from the Arizona Cardinals. We said these 3 players we believed would have the most fantasy value of any players out there. We also thought Russell Wilson was going to be pretty competitive, and I was very high on Tevin Coleman. I thought he was going to ball, but I still overall, in general, was very dubious of any 49er player outside of George Kittle. I was very dubious. So here we are, fast forward to 4 weeks later, Raymond, and so let's go through the rankings position by position. So let's start with the quarterbacks. And the number 1 quarterback in the NFC West, without question, he is the 3rd-ranked quarterback in fantasy across the entire league, is Russell, Muscle, Hustle, and Bustle Wilson. He's passed for 1,141 yards, 8 touchdowns. He's rushed for 88 yards, 2 touchdowns, and has total right now, average across maybe different depending on your league rules, but is 96.44 points so far through 4 fantasy games. That's pretty good. In the running backs, the 7th-ranked running back is, and as we accurately had predicted, David Johnson, top 7. He's rushed for 173 yards, 1 touchdown. He has 21 receptions, 182 yards for a total of 74.5 points. Coming after him is Mr. Todd Gurley. But definitely a regressive year for Mr. Todd Gurley. He is ranked 14th overall in fantasy running backs, rushed for 219 yards.
It's a far cry from where he was last year.
Far cry. Well, that knee is definitely, he has not been the same since the playoffs. We all know that he was injured throughout the playoffs, and he's definitely not been the same. He's rushed for 219 yards, 3 touchdowns. Then this is followed by 11 receptions, 62 yards for a total of 57.1 points. Coming in,
they've been doing a committee over there, and it's really eating up in his time. I think one of the only reasons why he had a big game this past week was because they had a big ass shootout against Tampa Bay, and they both scored almost nearly 100 points.
And you know what? To be honest, to Sean McVay's credit, he said at the beginning of the season that they really weren't that concerned with the beginning of the season, that they were going to go running back by committee with the intention of really unleashing him towards the end of the season when they needed him most. So for fantasy players, if you stay, Raymond, who has Todd Gurley, if you stay confident.
Used to have.
Say it again.
I don't have Todd Gurley this year.
Oh, who has Todd Gurley this year?
I think cousin Brian.
Oh, he does have Todd Gurley. Okay, so he is. If you stay, hold on to him, cousin Brian. He will be. They're hoping he's going to be pretty dominant weeks 12, 13, 14 on. So number 15 on the running back. So we have 3 NFC West running backs in the top 15. Mr. Chris Carson, 262 yards, 1 touchdown, 14 receptions for 100 yards. His total points are 56.2. So now, let's go into our wide receivers. And at number 2, my favorite wide receiver in all of the NFC West. The one guy I wish the 49ers would drafted. The wide receiver I wish we had. The wide receiver I wish ours would be. Mr. Number 2, Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp. 32 receptions, 388 yards, 3 touchdowns, 89.2 points. I am riding this guy to first place in my restaurant league. I'm in 3 different leagues. Then at number 9 for the Seahawks, Tyler Lockett. 26 receptions, 328 yards, 2 touchdowns, 70.8. So now those are the top 2. Those are top 2 right there in our tight ends. Big Mr. Kittle going in the 3rd round of every single league I was in. Kittle is not the number 1 wide receiver for the NFC West. It's for the Seahawks. Not yet. Mr. Will Dissly, 19 receptions, 181 yards, 4 touchdowns, 61.1 total points. And then behind him at number 13, the number 1 tight end in the league last year in fantasy, Mr. George Kittle, 17 receptions, 165 yards, 0 touchdowns, 33.5 total points, 50% of Mr. Will Dissly. Raymond, talk about game 1 a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about this because game 1 he had an opportunity to really put himself on the map, but he didn't. Explain that for the people.
Well, he had 2 touchdowns nullified by penalties. And had he had that, he would have easily had, I think, close to 26 points, which would have still been statistically, even going through his other games, would have still been his biggest game this year. So, and even now, that's still his best point total of the season so far. And he ended up with 13 points. And part of it is there's twofold. So Kyle Shanahan's offense is not fantasy friendly. It really isn't. And that's because, I will gladly take a non-friendly fantasy offense from Kyle Shanahan if it gives the Niners a W at the end of the day. Because, it's all about ball distribution. It's about spreading the ball around. It's not like a lot of these other teams that really kind of focus on 1 or 2, really potent assets, like Alvin Kamara is, him and Michael Thomas share the receiving job, and he gets the bulk of, he's getting a little bit more than his usual touches behind the line of scrimmage. They don't have Mark Ingram anymore. He plays for the Ravens. But so he's now getting that. Ever since Drew Brees went down, they're starting to run the ball a little bit more to alleviate some pressure off of Teddy Bridgewater. And so he's getting more touches. But my point is that like it's really only two guys that really kind of fuel that offense. Where in Kyle Shanahan's, no one's really emerged as a number one. And even if we did, Kyle Shanahan would still do what he's doing now, which is, Kittle's got 13 points, 8 points, and 11 points in the last 3 weeks. So he's getting an even look of distribution of looks or targets. Sorry, and the same can be said in the running back core. Breida shares carries with Raheem Mostert, but then when they get in the red zone, the ball goes to Jeff Wilson. So even if you get all the yards, you don't get to capitalize on all that yardage with a touchdown because it's going to be given to somebody else because Kyle Shanahan just loves to keep defenses off balance, and Jeff Wilson has proven he's had 4 touchdowns since getting called up, and he looked great in practice in the preseason. I was hoping that he would get a shot. I just didn't want it to come at the expense of Tevin Coleman, who's probably going to come back for next Monday's game. So I'm curious to see how they plan to rearrange the running game. Will it be Raheem Mostert that gets the goal line carries, or will Breida get those touches, or will Tevin Coleman's pretty good at goal line scoring? That was kind of one of his skill sets in Atlanta. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jeff Wilson goes back down or gets reduced to some kind of special teams role in favor of, a reliable, proven veteran like Tevin Coleman. We'll just have to see where it goes. But either way, none of these backs are really worth having, unfortunately. They're flex players is what they are. And, good luck guessing how that's going to, how that's going to, distribution is going to play out for any of those players. It's just really, really, because Kyle Shanahan doesn't give anything up like any other coach in the NFL, doesn't give away his chips. So it's hard to really figure out who's going to be the playmaker. The only one that's going to be consistent is George Kittle, because he's an amazing route runner and he has the best yards after catch of any tight end in the NFL right now. And I think he's up there in terms of yards after catch for receiving for just regular receivers too.
So to yes and you, Raymond, Will Dissly, as I mentioned, 19 receptions, 181 yards, 4 touchdowns. Kittle's right behind him. 17 receptions, 165 yards compared to 19, 181. The difference is the touchdowns. 4 touchdowns for Dissly, 0 for George Kittle. So that's their points are literally 50. His points are 50% of Will Dissly, but the yards and the receptions are almost identical. Almost identical. The difference has been this year in the red zone. 100% in the red zone. And as you already mentioned, 2 touchdowns called back in game 1. He would have already had 2 of the 4 of Will Dissly. It's just not his year for touchdowns so far.
Right.
So
I mean,
far.
it wasn't last year. He only had 5 last year too, but he was racking up so much yardage that it was like you could deal with it. But at the same time, he had like 50-yard run to a touchdown. He had 30-yard run to touchdown, so we just need to see a little bit more of that, hopefully that will come about in the next few weeks. We'll talk about, we'll obviously always bring up the Kittle matchups going into week after week now that we're done with the bye, which I is actually kind of helpful looking at, how our early injuries have stacked up. I want to get some of those guys back to healthy. But yes, going back to your point. Yeah, it's just not there for them yet, but there's still a lot of football left. Niners have not even got to 25% of the schedule yet.
No, they have not. So let's go on to the last 2 positions, kicker and defense. Positions I give very little, if any, credence to, but this is a fantasy show. We promised you full fantasy. So let's go. Number 2, Greg Zuerlein from the Los Angeles Rams with a total of 45 points. Then,
no surprise there.
Yeah, no surprise there. Zane Gonzalez, number 8 with the Arizona Cardinals with 34 points. And then Robbie Gould at number 14 with 28 points. I'm actually happy about this. The reason he hasn't is because the 49ers are actually putting up touchdowns this year. This is actually a good thing. For 49ers fans, this is a good thing. For fantasy, not as much. But still, the difference between number 2 and number 14 is only, 17 points? Not that big of a difference. Really not that big of a difference.
No, it isn't. And, to your point, that's exactly why Robbie's not the dominant kicker that he was last year, because we're scoring touchdowns now. We're not relying on him as much because we've been effective in the red zone the last few weeks, and not only are we scoring touchdowns on offense, but we've scored touchdowns on defense this year too. So we're scoring on both sides of the football, waiting for special teams to get in on that action with some returns. That would be nice to have, is something that we haven't seen happen since, Ted Ginn Jr. So it's been a while. And and so Greg Zuerlein's getting lots of field goals and point after attempts because they're putting up a little bit more points than we are. Although I have to look at the point total. I'm not sure how accurate that is. I think they've just been relying on more. Greg has gotten more field goal opportunities, and last week they put up over 40 points. So, that always is going to get you a bump up in the stats. And we had a bye. So once we catch up by a game, these stats will start to look a little bit more comparable in terms of the gap between, our position and the next NFC West team's position.
Raymond, I think that's actually really important to note too, is that we are comparing 3 weeks of 49ers to 4 weeks of Seahawks, Cardinals, and Rams. Let's go to the last one, the position I give almost no credence to, and that is defense. 49ers are ranked number 5 with a total of 41 points. The Seahawks are number 12 with a total of 33 points. The difference between 5th and 12 is a total of 8 points right now in fantasy averages. Still, 41 points is better than 33. Can't deny that. But the Niners so far, as you mentioned, are not really the kind of team that lend themselves well to fantasy value. 49ers, 5th ranked defense in fantasy, and then...
for fantasy, if you have a defense in fantasy, then by all means, you'll want one of these top 5 crews here.
Yes, no question.
Because I don't know how. In our family league, we give points to interceptions and sacks. So for a team like the Niners defense that's actually getting sacks and picks this year, that actually bolsters your point total on that back end position. That's obviously an accumulated position of all those players happening at once. I know some leagues have, which I think is weird, where you can actually pick defensive players. That just seems like a dice roll.
That's just too much. It's too much.
Yeah.
But I'm saying of all these positions, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, kickers, and defense, the only position that the 49ers crack the top 10 or even the top 5 is the defense, which also says a lot about where our defense is. So let's go, Raymond. Let's talk about the 3 most valuable players as of week 4. So before week 1, Louie and I predicted George Kittle from the 49ers, Todd Gurley from the Rams, and David Johnson from the Cardinals. The top 3 most valuable players coming out of fantasy right now are Russell Wilson, 96.44 points. Cooper Kupp at 89.2. My favorite fantasy player in the world. I hate to admit it. It's so true. And then Mr. David Johnson was 74.5. I would say out of all of these players, the player that I think has the most value is Cooper Kupp. I think Cooper Kupp, coming off that ACL, we did not expect him to be as dominant as he is, but he has really come on in the last couple weeks in fantasy numbers. His numbers are crazy right now.
Yeah, if it wasn't for Keenan Allen in LA, that's destroying the league right now with Phillip Rivers, Cooper Kupp would be the number 1 receiver.
He is. His fantasy value is off the chain right now. This is overall, you've seen the overall numbers of that team go down. Brandon Cooks, Robert Woods, and Cooper Kupp. It didn't matter who you had last year. All 3 of those guys were putting up monster numbers. Brandon Cooks has been okay. He's been not bad. I think you've just, in general, seen overall drop in production from everyone from the Rams. You see, I'm looking right now at the stats. You got Tyler Lockett in 9th place. Larry Fitzgerald coming in at 13th place. Larry Fitzy has definitely had a revival. 23 receptions, 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, 65 points total. And then Robert Woods all the way down at 19th with 26 receptions, 307 yards, 0 touchdowns, 61 points. Not a huge difference from Fitzy, and in fact, a little bit more yards, but no touchdowns. And then Brandon Cooks isn't even in the top 25. He has been a pretty big disappointment. This is a guy who is huge, but I think that has a lot more to do with Jared Goff than it does Brandon Cooks. What would you say?
Yeah, I think it's the fact that their running game really isn't producing as well as it has the previous 2 years. And because they're only running, because they're the bulk of the offense that really sets up the pass, because it's not pulling the same weight that it has, they're having a hard time getting the passing game going the way it has in the past. Because Sean McVay is a product of Kyle Shanahan. So he likes to run the play action pass, the pre-snap motion. He likes to do a lot of that stuff. It's not as well designed as Kyle Shanahan, obviously, and we went over that already. But part of that reason why it's not getting going as well as it has, because the running game isn't as strong as it has been. They're not the number one rushing team in the NFL. Not by a long shot. They have to run by committee because their workhorse isn't 100% right now. If he was, then he'd be getting all the carries, which is how he's handled. That's how his career's been. He's been the workhorse. But, I think perhaps some of those excess touches over the years are starting to catch up to him a little bit. It's hard to take that many touches and take a beating on your body. Only so many Frank Gore is an exception. He's not the rule. Frank Gore had 2 knee surgeries coming out of college and is still in the NFL now, the 4th all-time rusher of all time.
He's such a champ. He's an
amazing champion.
He's the best.
But my point is, he used to be a workhorse like that, and now he's on his 16th year or 13th or something. 4th, I don't know. He's up there. It's been a
100th year. I think he's on the 150th year.
Yeah, exactly. Frank Gore, 80 years old. He has a motorized wheelchair that he plays with now. It's got padding on the sides. But the point is, they're really hurting in the running game right now. And it's not to say that they're not getting any production. They are getting production in general, but it's just not as potent as it used to be, where it used to be kind of, that was 50% of their offense. Right now, I feel like it's more like an 80-20 deal happening between the running game and the passing game. Maybe that's an exaggeration. I don't watch them on a regular basis, and I haven't taken a deep look at the Rams stats, because who gives a shit? It's not my team. But
well, and as far as running backs are concerned, the 49ers don't even crack the top 25, and the NFC West in general. Again, running backs is very hard in fantasy.
Individually, yes, but as far as offense is concerned, Niners are a top 5 rushing offense.
Yeah, but we're not concerned about today. We're only looking at fantasy value. David Johnson, number 7. You've got Todd Gurley at 14th, Chris Carson at 15, and then no other NFC West running backs in the top 25. And then quarterbacks,
yikes.
Russell Wilson at number 3. I'm going through the list right now, and that's it. That's it. Russell Wilson at number 3. And then for total offense across the league, you've got Russell Wilson at number 7, Cooper Kupp at number 9, and I'm sorry, I just always say his name that way. If any of you guys are in my fantasy teams, I literally say that all the time because I've had him for 3 years straight, and he's been one of the absolute most monstrous wide receivers I've ever had in fantasy. He is the best. I wish the Niners had him so badly. But Wilson at 7, Kupp at 9, and then that's it. That's it for total all offense. So in general, Russell Wilson and Cooper Kupp are the most valuable top 25 players. And then, of course, David Johnson coming in at number 3. So our predictions, Raymond, were total bullshit.
In the end, in conclusion,
they were bullshit. Really interesting. If I was to take, let me ask you, Raymond, let's predict 4 weeks from now, do any of the 49ers offensive players crack it? Jimmy G, Kittle, I have no hope for the wide receivers.
I would say I think you nailed it. As far as conjecture is concerned, I think Jimmy G and Kittle are the only two that have a chance. Jimmy G likes to take chances, and so he tends to give up a pick almost, every other game, so that might hurt him.
It will improve over time, though.
But it will. He just needs reps to get used to that. He doesn't have a lot of reps, but he has the potential to be a 70% type of thrower, which is Drew Brees territory, which is hard to hit, but I think he's done it in games before, so we'll just have to see. I think he's capable of doing that. He has the capability to be like the second best quarterback in the NFC West. Right now, I can't crown him as far as record's concerned. Yes, you can say he's the best, but it's he has to prove a lot more. Russell Wilson is the best quarterback in the NFC West by far. But I think that Jimmy G has the potential to unseat him over time.
I hope you're right.
He's coming in his prime, and one still kind of. I mean, Russell Wilson still plays like he's in his prime. He just doesn't have the same cast that got him to the promised land before. So I think that's the only thing. But the fact that he doesn't get hit and avoid sacks a lot, also helps him. That's why Brett Favre, was able to start majority of the games of his career, because he just was so goddamn hard to sack, and he would always sling the ball out before you got to him.
So I will say this in conclusion. If you have Cooper Kupp or Russell Wilson, kudos to you. Well done. If you don't have Cooper Kupp or Russell Wilson, maybe now's the time to trade for him. I really could have traded for Kupp last week. Our dad, famously the unofficial fourth member of the GoldCast, he wanted Julio Jones and running back, and we could not decide which running back. I should have just given him straight up. I think he was considering Julio Jones straight up for Cooper Kupp, which I should have done, because it would have been the dumbest trade for him ever and the greatest trade for me. But alas, it is what it is. I am second place in that league, first place in my other league. Cooper Kupp's with me in that league, and that's where he's going to stay. It is all right with me. Any final thoughts, Raymond, on the NFC West Fantasy Check-In Week 4 edition?
I'm sorry?
I said any final thoughts?
Oh, no. No, just I think Jimmy G will start to climb the ladder as the offense starts to polish itself out, and I think George Kittle will eventually catch up to the rest of the tight ends and crack that top 5. Some guys have just gotten a better start than him. Mark Andrews was nothing last year, and he had a monstrous start. Travis Kelce's, very consistent in that offense. So they just have to.
We'll see you next time. Same GoldCast time. Same. GoldCast channel. Let's go.
This is the GoldCast.
We are the voice of the Bay. I'm your host, Rudy Solis III, and with me is my brother, my co-host,
Raymond Salisa first, baby.
Boom. We'll see you next time. Same GoldCast time, same GoldCast channel. Let's go.
This is the GoldCast.